the fundamental idea of pro and cons of GMOs. It seems to me that we discussed today the question, how do we deal in the EU on the approval side with it? So do we it more centralized or do we it more subsidized? Let's start with some introduction speeches. And let me introduce the first speeches. We will start with Dorothée André. She is coming from the head of unit of the biotechnology from the DG Sanko European Commission. She's followed by Rita Andorko from the Hungarian presidency. Welcome, very happy that you are here. And I welcome to my left the most important person here in the Parliament for this issue, Mrs. Corinne Lepage. She is the rapporteur for the dossier. And I'm very happy that you're with us today. And on my right side is Jan Mulder, my colleague from the Netherlands, and he's strongly involved in agriculture issues and so also on GMO issues. And we will start with some introduction perspective from all these peoples I introduced now, and we will the seminar will follow then by presentation of guest speakers, but I will introduce them later. So Dorothée, let's start with you. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me here today. The cultivation proposal is an important one for the Commission, and we are working closely with Parliament and with Council as part of the co-decision process now. So the Commission brought this proposal in July, and it is going to complement the existing legal framework, and the idea is to give a possibility to Member States to restrict or prohibit the cultivation of GMO on their territory. And this is going to give to the Member States powers based on reasons other than the reasons which they can use already now, which is the reasons based on the assessment of risk for health and the environment. For the moment, they can use safeguard clauses if there is a serious concern to health and the environment. And now we are going to add extra reason and give this an additional legal base for all 27 member states to restrict or prohibit the cultivation of GMO. So the proposals also makes clear that the measure is about cultivation and not about import and marketing of seeds, of feed, and of food. And another important point which I would like to stress is that the EU authorization, which is based on science, is preserved, and the measures, national measures, will still need to be justified on ground other than those harmonized by the EU-wide risk assessment. So the EU-wide risk assessment remains. What are the grounds which member states can use? Well, in the Commission proposal, we didn't put these grounds, but Commissioner Dalli promised in the Environmental Council of December to prepare an indicative list of possible grounds. And we did so, and the Commission services delivered a document with an open list with possible examples, and this was discussed in the working party in the Council under Hungarian presidency on 11 February and yesterday. And some grounds, we heard that some member states or some members of the Parliament are concerned. For example, let's take the ground of public order. And what I want to explain is that we have made the list, the indicative list, based on public interest reasons, and these reasons are all part either of the treaty or, like for example, public morale and public order, They are also in the existing case law of the Court of Justice, such as social policy or cultural policy objectives, or they could be inferred from the secondary legislation, like, for example, the ground which is to avoid GMO in other products. So it is clear that the grounds mentioned in the list, in fact, cannot create precedent because they already exist in EU law. And furthermore, the grounds we have proposed are open, so nothing says that somebody, a member state, cannot add some other grounds. And this list of grounds should not be read as political statements of the Commission in favor of one or the other ground. It's just really giving what, for us, is legally possible. There has been also some concerns about the public morale ground, and there is a case between the Commission and Poland on this, and the court contested the that the national measures of Poland were justified on ethical grounds. And there has been discussion on this in several fora, and the view of the Commission is that this argument, this justification could be defended if it's well justified, but in the present case of Poland, the justification came very late in the process, and this is our understanding why this was rejected, because it was not the initial ground used by Poland. Now, the Commission believes that these ethical grounds could be really used and could stand the scrutiny of the court. Now we have another ground which is, how do you say, provocating a lot of discussion, which is the environmental policy objective and consideration, other than those covered in the environmental risk assessment. This has been brought by the Commission, but also in the Parliament, in the different groups. So what we proposed was that this ground would allow policy choices linked to a certain prioritization of certain functions of the environment of a given territory. So this means that this kind of ground could be used together in combination with other justification, such as land use or preservation of particular agricultural systems. As a concrete example, we could give the maintenance of a particular landscape or landscape feature, or of some ecosystem functions, such as, for example, a specific aesthetical value or recreational value. But for us, these environmental policy grounds are overarching grounds and are not, should be chosen on the basis of a policy choice and not on the basis of a risk for the environment. And the risk should be assessed by the risk assessors, by the member states, and by EFSA. Now, our approach was not to include the grounds in the proposal in order to give a lot of flexibility to member states, but, well, as I explained before, we have done this in an open mind to contribute to the debate, and we are happy to continue to discuss on these grounds. One thing which we should mention also is that any ground must be, but like any national measure in general, must be proportionate and non-discriminatory. And obviously it must be justified and substantiated with the real facts of the member state or of the region. And this is why could be very well that reasons in one member state are not the same as in another member state. And it's really to the member states now to fully exercise their responsibility and use this flexibility we are giving to them. And let me remind you that we have also the recommendation on coexistence, which was adopted in July, which gives them also some flexibility. Now, we have seen the various reports and amendments tabled, which move in a direction of good clarification of the grounds, and we are really happy to work on these. Now, let me tell you that we would like to stress one thing. This is about the choice of a member state not to cultivate GMO. But if there would be a risk, obviously, it would not be a choice not to cultivate, but the Commission would take its responsibility and not authorize the product in question. So it's the choice when something is safe not to cultivate it. It's a choice, it's not an obligation, so member states can do it. The other member states who don't want to use this kind of grounds are not obliged to do it. And we believe that with all this, member states should now have all elements needed in order to proceed as regards GMO cultivation. And I hope that with this introduction you will have understood the Commission's proposal, and I'm happy to participate to the debate today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dorothy, for this first introduction. I forgot to say that we have translation in German, French, English, and Spanish, so you're invited to use the excellent service of our interpreters. And I want to hand over immediately to Rita Andorko. Is it right? Andorko, yeah. She is here from the Hungarian presidency, and we are very interested to hear the Council perspective. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank for the kind invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Rita Andorko. I work for the Ministry of Rural Development in the Biodiversity and Gene Conservation Unit in Hungary. I'm the deputy head of the ad hoc Council Working Party meetings dealing with the GMO package during the Hungarian presidency. At its meeting on December 2008, the Environmental Council adopted conclusions identifying particular areas for improvement of the implementation of the GMO legislation. All the requests of the Council should be carried out in order to ensure the appropriate implementation of Directive 2001/18. In the Council conclusions, the revision of the EFSA guidelines on environmental risk assessment of GMOs was a major point which should be improved. Developing further guidelines relating to the environmental effects of GMOs on non-target organisms, for example, considering the long-term effects and considering also implications for health. Furthermore, it is necessary not only to consider the possible geographical regions or zoning concepts of the receiving environments, but to identify them. In December 2008, the Council requested the Commission to provide a report on the social and economic implications, considerations of GMOs and their cultivation. It is also essential to address the issue of establishing thresholds for labeling GMO traces in conventional seeds at the lowest practicable, proportionate, and functional levels for all economic operators. So it must be pointed out that the full implementation of the Council conclusions remain a crucial element of the wider GMO agenda. The basic obligation imposed by Directive 2001/18 is that the member states shall, in accordance with the precautionary principle, ensure that all appropriate measures are taken to avoid adverse effects of human health and the environment which might arise from the deliberate release or the placing on the market of GMOs. However, it is also essential to address recurring legitimacy issues. According to the European Commission's report, the percentage of European citizens opposing genetically modified food is increasing. Furthermore, more than 1 million signatures were collected to strengthen the current GMO legislation in the European Union by the AVES and the Greenpeace. Taking into consideration of these legitimacy issues, the Commission proposed a new GMO package last year, aiming to confer to member states the freedom to restrict or ban the cultivation of GMOs on part or all of their territory, while keeping unchanged the existing EU science-based authorization system. The question is, based on what kind of grounds member states may adopt measures to restrict or prohibit the cultivation of GMOs. The Hungarian presidency would like to progress work on this file. During the Hungarian presidency, 3 ad hoc working party meetings are scheduled. The last working party meeting was held yesterday. At ministerial level, an exchange of views at the Environmental Council was held on the 14th of March. In May, a state of play of the work done will be presented at the Agriculture and Fisheries Council. And in June, we really hope that we could reach a first reading agreement or either a political agreement in the Council. What we have done already. Following the deliberations in the Environmental Council in December 2010, the Commission presented the list containing possible grounds based on which member states may adopt measures to restrict or prohibit the cultivation of GMOs on their territory. In the meantime, in order to facilitate the discussions and to structure the work on the GMO package, the presidency provided a kind of non-paper, a discussion paper, summarizing the main stumbling blocks that have emerged in the discussions, as well as identifying possible avenues to overcome the concerns expressed by the member states and by the institutions. Following the ad hoc working parties held on the 11th of February, several member states commented on the presidency's non-paper and the Commission's list. And in the light of these comments, the presidency proposed a new revised text of the proposal. This is the so-called compromise proposal. There are several concerns which left open, but I would like to highlight the main question, the key question. The main point is what kind of general environmental objectives, general environmental considerations could be used as grounds for the restriction or prohibition of the cultivation of GMOs. There are different environmental considerations from those covered in Directive 2001/18 and the Regulation 1829/2003. These environmental considerations basically include the protection, the maintenance of specific ecosystem function and services, as Dorothee has already mentioned, the specific ecosystems and habitats, the maintenance of certain type of natural and landscape features. For example, the protection of the places of special beauty, touristically important places, geological features, and places with special interest. There are other general environmental considerations as well, which might be complementary to those covered in the mentioned directive and regulation. I mean here when there are missing or insufficient data with regard to the possible effects of GMOs. In the new guidance published by EFSA last year in November 2010, there were several issues which were addressed, but are not compulsory assessed. You can see some of them highlighted on the slide. The discussions held on yesterday's ad hoc working party meeting, we focused mainly on these environmental issues. We haven't finished the debate. This question has been left open. We are working really hard to bring together the views of the committees of the European Parliament and the Council. Finally, our aim is that the member states would have the possibility to restrict or prohibit the cultivation of GMOs in their territory or in the part of their territory. but this possibility has to be based on reasonable and legally sound grounds. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want directly hand over to the rapporteur of the Parliament, Corinne. It seems to me that this is a very difficult job because you're dealing here with an extremely controversial issue. And it seems to me it will not be easy to find a common ground for compromises. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Merci pour votre invitation. Je suis très heureuse.
Thank you very much for inviting me today, and I'm really happy as rapporteur to come along and take part in the debate today. You were saying in your introduction that this isn't any kind of religious debate on the pros and cons of GMOs. The question is, how can we, on a solid legal basis, and that's essential, without questioning a community evaluation, because how can we give member states who want it a solid possibility of limiting or banning some or all GMOs within their territory? That is the question. Of course, we are respecting community principles, be it principles of proportionality, as we've heard, scientific evaluation, the freedom of choice, and of course, a high level of protection of the environment and health, which is part of the European Union Treaty. So I think you will see that it's not easy to bring all this together. We were meant to vote in Strasbourg in the ENVI committee last week on the text, and I am currently working on the proposals for compromise because the amendments that were put forward by the different groups are very interesting and actually complement one another as well. So I'm fairly optimistic on the possibility of coming up with compromise texts. Now, on the aim of this, I think we can agree. We can agree following the Commission's proposal and its president. It's an old one. When President Barroso came to campaign to us, that was one of the things that he mentioned right at the very beginning. I think we can understand the measure as well, whether you're for or against GMOs, because at the moment we're in a block system that doesn't help anybody, and the proposal being made today would be a way of bringing the debate forward. And people who wanted to reject the Commission's proposal, I don't think are in a majority in Parliament. I may be wrong, but I don't think there's a majority against the proposal. There are some people who are against it, people who feel that it is out of the question to give member states any freedom on this issue, or they feel that GMOs should be banished from the Union altogether, and to discuss anything about them is validating the possibility of developing GMOs in Europe. So there are two contrary views for diametrically opposed reasons who want to reject this proposal. Now, that's not my point of view. I think the Commission is offering us an opportunity to reflect, and I think we should take this on board. I think you recalled what the real question is. The lady from the Hungarian presidency did say what the real subject is. What is the motivation? Well, I agree with your thinking, and I would emphasize that I would like us to find a compromise on the type of environmental evaluation, a complementary and not a substitute. So a complementary environmental evaluation that could be given to member states to provide grounds for a ban. And in the proposals that I will be making, there will be a number of elements which I think are already contained in the informal list that was put forward by Commissioner Dalli. But I do not think that we can stay at the Commission's original position, which is to say any reason on environmental and health can be taken into account. I don't think that will hold water. Madame Andre, I am very reserved as a lawyer on the legal validity in front of the Court of Justice. I mean, if you think about the French safeguard clause at the moment, that gives you an example. So I'm very cautious about anything has to do with culture, religion, public morality. I don't think any of that will hold water at the Court of Justice, and even less so in the WTO. So what we need to do is have objective reasons that can be described objectively, which can easily be defended. So I would therefore suggest environmental and agro-environmental reasons, taking into account of special ecosystems, particular geographic regions, as you were saying earlier on, Madam. It does mention this in the directive. Taking account of the GMO impact and the herbicide being used on local biodiversity. And this will show the difference between subsidiarity linked to local environment and the general evaluation of the GMO, which is a community evaluation. Insect and weed resistance, and finally questions linked to national ecosystems. Now, of course, agricultural practice diversity, the size of holdings between member states and within member states, these are additional elements that could be taken into account. So here we have a whole raft of elements. They are environmental, agri-environmental, and all these different reasons can be listed. Like Council, I would like the debate to be expanded to the economic aspects. I think that's very important, just because one of the justifications for developing GMOs is to help farmers. But I think to be able to make their choices, farmers need to have a precise knowledge of the advantages of using GMOs, not just in the first year, not just in the second year, but to further down the line. And I think that here we're looking at the socio-economic impact. So, does any resistance arise? That farmers going to need more pesticide? What's the situation going to be? Is it going to cost more at the end of the day or less at the end of the day? I think that these are all very specific issues which are going to have a direct effect on agriculture and on farmers. So I think that that's extremely important, including the economic cost for producers and market loss. There was this Darling in the US and contamination. All of these are things that will be taken into account. The organic sector, the conventional sectors that don't want any GMO contamination. So I think that around all these topics we will be able to find a reasonable compromise. I think we'll be able to find a reasonable compromise that will get a majority support within the Parliament, and that on which we can agree with the Council and Commission. And I would say that it may go too far for some, not far enough for others, but that's the name of the game, really. But I think it will enable us to give our citizens the tools to do what they want to do, because there are some countries that don't want to have any GMO crops, and I don't see why they should be forced to plant GM crops if they don't want to. Other countries want to develop them. Well, this is a democracy. If countries want to plant GM, they should be allowed to do so. And at the same time, we are giving ourselves additional tools that will enable us to arrive at a clear and proper application of the Council decision of 2008. Because when I was going over this dossier again, I said to myself that if we had properly applied 2001-18, including Annex 2, and by carrying out the studies that are contained in Annex 2, looking at the short, medium and long term. And had we applied the Council decisions of 2008, 2.5 years old, we probably would not today be having to work on a new text.
Yeah, thank you, Corinne. Jan Mulder on my right side. It seems to me that it was in 2009 a Dutch initiative in the Council to say let's try to come out of the dead end if we renationalize the dealing with GMOs. What is your perspective on that issue?
I think the subject that we are discussing is highly interesting and also very controversial, as everybody knows. I see the technique of genetical engineering as a new technique in mankind, and I think in general, with all the restrictions, I am positive towards it. It can have many benefits, and I think we should pursue it. As far as the legislation is concerned, that was established in my first term in Parliament in the period 94-99, and I remember the vivid discussions we had then. But when we discussed it, at that time, we only discussed about one possible technique. It is the implantation of genes in any other plant, and then the technique is in general called transgenesis. Since then, as with my iPads, I have an iPad here. I bought it about half a year ago, and to my chagrin, I have now discovered that it is already very old-fashioned, that there is a new one on the market, which is much better, and I should have waited a bit. Now, so it is with genetical engineering as well. It is, the developments in it are going very fast, and we have all kinds of techniques. My main preoccupation has been, in the last number of years, that the legislation in Europe is too one-sided. Not all kinds of genetical engineering are the same, and you will later you will hear more about it. But there is a new technique which is called cisgenesis, which in my view should have a different approach from the European Union in comparison with transgenesis. What is the difference? If you have, for instance, I don't know, I'm not a specialist, if it happens in practice, but if you have a maize plant which is attacked by insects, you could probably implant a gene of an insect in that maize plant, and subsequently the maize plant is resistant against that attack. Transgenesis, you implant a foreign gene into another organism. But you have also the other examples, that is, for instance, with potatoes. You have potato varieties that are resistant against certain diseases. And you can implant a gene from a potato variety that is resistant into a potato variety that is not resistant, and subsequently you get the variety that was not resistant becomes resistant. And then you implant the genes from the same variety, the same species, into another plant. And I think that is of a different kind of category than the traditional genetical engineering where we are talking about. But there are better specialists than I on that point. I think that needs a different kind of approach from the European Union. And apart from the discussion about should we allow it nationally or not nationally, I'm looking forward to the compromises that will be forced by Mrs. Lepage. But I think we should take that approach into account as well. The technique is going very fast, and legislation should not be too fixed on one technique. It should make it possible for different techniques to have a different approach in the European Union. That is a bit different from what we have discussed in the last interventions, but that would be my approach for the European Union. I think we should allow certain techniques under a different framework of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Your statement provokes me to say a political sentence, but I will not do it because I'm only the moderator today. But we have maybe the opportunity to come later to that. I'm very happy that we have now the opportunity to listen to different stakeholders on this issue. Let me welcome 5 guest speakers. They are here with us today. I want to introduce it very fast, and it seems to me that you will do that by yourself if you have then the floor. The first one will be Marco Contiero. He's the Senior Policy Director on Genetic Engineering of Greenpeace. He's followed by Arnaud Petit, Commodities and Trade Director of COPA. Then we will listen to Andoni Garcia from the Spanish Farmers Union, COAC. Then I welcome Professor Dr. Evert Jacobsen from the Wageningen University and Research Center, and our last speaker will be Dr. Ralf Michael Schmidt. He's working on for BASF, Vice President of the BASF, concerning with this GMO issues. Let's have a look to the time. We are 10 minutes later than planned. I think it's still in the frame, but keep in mind that we have to leave the room here, and we should final this seminar on time on 11:30. But now let's start with the presentation of Marco Contiero from Greenpeace. Please, you have the floor.
Thanks a lot. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me thank you, the organizer, for inviting us to address this issue, which we believe is very important. Before looking at, well, I'll try in just 10 minutes to look at the main reasons why Greenpeace and other NGOs have an opposition towards these technologies. Let me also say that what you'll see today is either based on industry figures or based on peer-reviewed scientific data. It's not invented by Greenpeace or calculated by us. So these are industry figures. I've been presented already. Many of you have seen these graphs. According to these figures, more than 90% of the global arable land is grown with, without GM feed, which means that Europe is not the only GM-free heaven or paradise in the world. And if you look at the 10%, the orange fraction, this is mainly covered by 4 countries: US, Brazil, Canada, and Argentina. They grow more than 85% of GM crops. Again, it means that these countries have taken a decision which is different from the rest of the world, and not Europe taking decisions which are different from the rest of the world. As regards this pie chart, it's very interesting. We've been talking about it for decades of research, 16 years now of commercialization. I don't know how many millions spent on this technology, and we still have 2 traits. The 22% is pesticide producing, and the remaining 78%, including the stack events, are herbicide tolerance, meaning tolerance to herbicide produced by the same companies that produce the GM and market the GM crop. But look at the risks. Why are we claiming about these risks? Well, there are some reasons. I here just had the chance to put some of them. The technology is inherently prone to unintended and unexpected, unpredictable effects. I'm not saying that these effects happen all the time. I'm just saying the technology is brilliant. It's amazing what this technology can do. But we have to bear in mind that we need to know much more about the consequences of these technologies. There is poor understanding yet about the complex mechanisms that regulate the genes, their interaction with the plant metabolisms, and the interaction with actually the receiving environments where these plants are grown. There are examples of fragments and rearrangements of DNA within crops. This is quite common. I here have a slide on 4 crops. You can see the number of rearrangements and fragments found. This is probably a bit more clearer. It's a drawing about the genome of Roundup Ready soybean, and the red parts are the fragments that have not been actually submitted to authorization and have been found, not by us, but by other scientists within the genome of the plant. And some of them are rearranged, and there is DNA which we actually don't know what exactly is the function of. This is just to give you a general example of what we're talking about. Environmental impacts, that's another reason why we object these technologies, because depending on the trait of the crops we are dealing with, we have impacts on non-target organisms, on microorganisms in the soil, water, ecosystems. In case of herbicide-tolerant crops, we do have concerns about the toxicity of the herbicide, about the impacts that the development of weed resistance have. This is just to show you the incredible increase in the use of glyphosate, a herbicide, in Argentina due to the cultivation of Roundup Ready soybean. But then the costs. This technology is very expensive. This is a slide by Bayer showing that on average, to produce one crop, it costs $100 million. We do have estimations by Monsanto regarding drought-tolerant maize going much beyond 150 million in their annual report. It's also expensive for farmers, not only because of the seeds are more expensive and usually marketed with contracts that link seeds to agrochemicals, but also because, as the United Nations Agriculture Assessment stated, the patents linked to that may drive up costs, may disrupt the actually experimentations by other public institutions, and also hinder other kind of technologies, as I'll show later. And then there is contamination. Contamination poses costs ex ante and ex post, because conventional organic farmers need to prevent contamination, needs to ensure the purity of their products, and when they are hit by contamination, of course, they have to face damages. As regards another characteristic, it boosts corporate control. The GM market is owned by 6 companies. 3 of them are American, 3 of them are Europeans. The same 6 companies also own, well, 74% of the global agrochemical market, which can give you an idea why these companies are actually, well, why the crops on the fields are actually, for 80% of them, resistant to agrochemicals. And even more disturbing, in my opinion, is the fact that in just a bit more than 10 years, we had a huge increase in the control of the seed market. 3 companies control practically 50% of the proprietary seed market, seeds traded throughout the world. And this is, I think, is a very sensitive and sensible issue to be looked at least. As I said, the focus, the support, the fact that there are only debates about GMOs hinder other solutions which are already available, which are actually used already by farmers. Agroecology is one of them. The UN General Assembly received 2 weeks ago a report stating that in just 10 years, developing countries can double their food production by using agroecological practices. Many scientific peer-reviewed studies show that the increase in yields is massive. Agroforestry is one of these examples. The World Agroforestry Center showed that in Malawi, by combining fertilizer trees with conservation agricultural practices, maize yields increased by 280%, not to mention the other benefits that this kind of technology brings to farmers, and it doesn't cost a thing. Another one, push-pull systems. Here, in order to fight against a pest and a persistent weed, instead of creating a new plant, 10 years, hundreds of millions of costs, instead of pouring the soil with pesticides and herbicides, researchers decided to look at 2 things, one legume and another plant. The legume pulls away the pest, and the Napier grass, it actually attracts the pest. At the same time, the legume within the maize rows provides the soil with nutrients, with the nitrogen. It kills the weed, and both are actually used as fodder for animals. This is a very good system, which does not cost a thing, again, to farmers, which has been found by researchers investigating these kind of issues. The reason why this agroforestry and many other examples of agroecological practices, the reason why they are not widespread in the world is that there is no economic advantage of some companies behind, unfortunately. Let's look at crop enhancement, which is what genetic engineering is supposed to do. Well, look at that. Genetic engineering is just one single part of modern biotechnologies, which is part of many other biotechnologies which we can use. And they are, other than all the agronomic and agricultural technologies we can adopt. So we are opposed to only that specific part, not all the others. For example, we are very in favor of marker-assisted selection, another newer modern biotechnology which can produce plants with stress tolerance to droughts, to floods, to salt, that doesn't pose the same concerns that genetic engineering poses, and which are much cheaper and can be used by public institutions. These are just examples of crops which have been produced with mass and are already in the fields. They have been produced by public institutions. drought-resistant maize, drought-resistant wheat, salt-tolerant rice, rice that is capable of growing with 60% less water than the normal plant. Consumers' rejection is the seventh reason why we oppose it. I don't think we need to spend much time on it. Eurobarometer shows that consumer rejection is increasing in Europe. The knowledge about GM is also increasing. The blue part shows the amount of knowledge that people have about the issue. It's much higher than in the past. And let me focus on the last 2 points. The legal requirements we have in Europe. They address risk assessors and risk managers. These are just some of the legal requirements that these risk assessors must look at. The receiving environment, the long-term impact, the fact that scientific divergent opinions must be looked at. This is, it has already been mentioned, what the unanimity of the Council said in 2008, sending recommendation to the Commission and EFSA. The system must be implemented more strongly, more properly. There must be real assessment of long-term impacts, of impacts on known target organisms, of the impacts of the herbicide use with herbicide-tolerant plants, and so on. These are practically mirroring Greenpeace concerns on one specific crop, on Monnet 10. Our concerns are based on the legal requirements, which we feel are not respected, and are based on peer-reviewed scientific studies. These ones, just I calculated, 75 scientists have been involved in these studies, which we then brought forward to the European Commission to claim that the reassessment and reauthorization of Monnet 10 was not justified. So when people say that Greenpeace is scaremongering, well, they have to insult directly these 75 scientists and the scientific reviews journals where their studies are published. And to conclude, the risk managers, of course, they have a very, very relevant issue. In Europe, we do have principles. The precautionary principle is one. The principle to have a high protection of the environment is another one. And as the Commission itself stated when releasing the communication on the precautionary principle, when there are unacceptable risks, scientific uncertainty, and public concern, which are three characteristics of the debate about GMOs, the decisions must be very strong and have to take into account various factors. I think the factors I've been presenting today would allow a risk manager to take the final decision that GM does not find place in this European Union, while other technologies, which are ignored so far, should become central to the debate. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much for this presentation. We have, after the presentations, the opportunity to ask questions or to react to that what we heard and have seen. I want to hand over to, where he is, Arnaud Petit, Commodities and Trade Director of COPA. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. And as it is given an opportunity to use my native language, je vais parler en français. Donc, effectivement, juste
I'd just like to say a few words about COPA Cogeca, which is the European organisation representing farmers and farmers' cooperatives from 27 member states. So basically we represent all the farmers, about 15 million farmers working in farms in the European Union, and over 40,000 farm cooperatives employing over 600,000 people. So that sums up a long history of agricultural representative at European level. I would also like to just recall the what's really at stake for European farming over the coming years. I mean, people take for granted that Europe has food security, but if you look at the fact that Europe is a net importer of beef, for example, 32 million tons of vegetable protein, and we are basically net importers of all kinds of foods. So I don't think that food security is just a political issue, it's a concrete situation for European citizens. So let's take a look at what this means in terms of use of land. At the moment, the European Union is using 35 million hectares outside the European Union, and of the 35 million hectares, about 17 and 18 are cultivated under GM, soya and rape. So European citizens are already utilising GM crops on a large scale. If I would concentrate now on the essential point now, how to improve European legislation on the subject of improving productivity in the agricultural sector. The first point that was raised is that the Environment Council of December 2008 set out a series of measures to improve legislation overall, and the proposal that we're looking at today is simply looking at the national flexibility and freedom to ban GMOs or not. And that means we can't look at the whole of the problem of GMOs. We think there are two other important subjects to tackle, which is the presence of GMOs in seeds, which is part of safeguarding the process. Let's not forget that all crops begin with seeds. The second important aspect are coexistence measures. They're not all defined in member states, so after a directive that was adopted over 10 years ago, if we don't have coexistence measures in member states, is that good application of existing legislation? Well, if we want to talk about improving legislation, I think we need to have an overall package. The second aspect for European farmers is that what we want to be able to have is coexistence of different types of agriculture between those farmers that want to grow organic food, others that want to use conventional methods, and others that want to use GMOs. To enable these farmers to coexist, we do need a degree of legal security. As was said earlier on by the rapporteur, the WTO dossier is a very thorny one, many questions for us, because, you know, if you've got a WTO panel, the first products that get affected are farm products. So before going any further, let's not forget that if we do set up a legislation that will be criticised by the WTO, it'll be the farmers as a whole that suffer. The second important point in the proposal, both the Commission's proposal and the text that we're discussing within the Parliament, is the change of the legal basis. Changing the legal basis is going to give a whole different viewpoint for the question. We're moving away from the question of the market to the question of soil use, and that gives you a completely different perspective on the debate. Now, this raises problems. It creates new problems and new uncertainties for farmers. The first is that if you set up this legal basis on the use of land, on land use, well, why stop with GMOs? Are some regions going to say, I don't want sunflowers, I don't want any particular kind of crop? People could rule out particular crops, and we would be setting a precedent that could have all kinds of effects under restrictive measures in the future. In this territorial approach, we still do not have a European definition of what an area free of GMO crops is. We do not know what that means. Does it mean there's no GMO crops, or there's no presence whatsoever? It's different. Everyone has their own definition. So if we do not have this clarified, I think we're going to remain in a bit of a legal vacuum if we change the legal basis and go to the land use angle. Now, legal security for farmers. Well, banning GMOs at national level, well, yes, there is a freedom of choice there for member states, but I think the freedom of choice has to be adaptable to economic models as well, because farmers, in the proposal that we have today from the Commission, if a farmer has the right to plant GM crops, he may not be allowed to harvest them. There's no legal security. to make those investments. So that's the first point. So these national bans need to be have a framework within that implementation. And if you look precisely at what is happening in the farm sector, very often farmers, and this is the same for any economic activity, before they plant things, they look at the harvest, they look at the economic circumstances. And people are looking at the 2012 harvest at the moment. So you do need to have a minimum of 12 months before harvest in order for farmers, when they're drawing up contracts with processing industry, etc., they need to have some legal security, because otherwise it'll be the farmers that lose out. If they're not able to deliver the goods, it will be the farmers that suffer. Second important point, I would say, is the concept of the single market. There are two risks here. If you take this approach of a lack of a framework for national decisions, there is a risk, let's not forget it. If you have to use origin labelling as a label that's saying grown in a given country which is GMO free, then you've lost your single market, you've got territorialisation. And the second important aspect here, which is gives rise to concern, I would say, is that within national freedom, and even if you're looking at environmental aspects, you could apply the same thing to animal welfare. I mean, you could have the same questioning of the single market if given countries want to apply animal welfare clauses and other countries don't. So then you're going to call into European legislation. So you can see here that there could be a kind of unravelling of European legislation, which we at least would find worrying. And the last point that I wanted to raise by way of conclusion is that, I mean, you said earlier on what President Barroso said, and this was followed by an initiative as well, the Europe 2020 initiative to have a European economy based on growth and innovation. Well, I would say that today the real challenge for European decision makers is to make this concrete, to bring this to life. Because if we're looking at a technology, and we've heard a lot it's about the fact that it's 15 years old, we in Europe are still asking questions without actually implementing the policy that's 15 years old. In the 2001-18 directive, there was obligatory monitoring. So but that's not possible at the moment. So if you're in the wind, your destiny is that of a dead leaf, as the philosopher said. So we need to know what we want in the future. Do we want to be able to ensure food security in the future? Do we want to be able to incorporate society's new expectations? And as was recalled in the question and the questions put to European citizens, there's about 10% of Europeans want to buy GM crops, and 10% is a significant market. Just to talk in terms of the economic crisis, which we are still experiencing, lower consumption in the farm market, the dairy sector. That's on the basis of 5%, but what if 10% of citizens were saying we want to eat GM crops, and we banned that for them, then and we didn't let the European farmers grow these crops, then we've got a big problem. So there you are, Chairman. I hope I haven't exceeded the time allotted.
Especially for this very urgent call to take responsibility. It seems to me that it's not the only case where the latest stand of technology is not on the same way as the legislation. And we should be very careful and be aware that we do not create here a second Novelfoot example. That's why is that a very important message. Let's come to the Spanish farmers. Andoni Garcia, Spanish Farmers Union. Coac, please, you have the floor.
Gracias, Presidente. Gracias.
Thank you very much, President, and thank you very much to the ALDE group for the invitation that they gave us to participate in this conference. COAG is an organization which works with the Spanish state. We defend a model of traditional social agriculture. We're made up of thousands of farmers spread out all over Spain. We defend a sustainable, family-oriented type of agriculture in which we aim to produce quality produce, respecting a balance with the environment. Safety is extremely important, and we want to guarantee a decent level of living for all farmers. The situation of GMOs in Spain is developing in Spain. In the past year, we had 76,000 hectares originally. Well, rather, now we're cultivating maize MON 810. Previously, we produced the maize BT 176, which was taken off the market. But Spain did take it off the market 2 years later than the date set out by the Commission. Over the years that we've been cultivating GM crops in Spain has shown the fact that farmers reject the cultivation of GM crops. And the reduction can be proof of this. At the moment, the majority of the Spanish population, and this is according to figures from the Eurobarometer, it shows that 53% of the Spanish population is against GM crops. And only 27% of the population are in favour. The Spanish government has favoured the interests of multinational companies who produce GM crops. And in the papers of WikiLeaks, it's been shown that the Spanish government, the Secretary of State, the Ministry for Agriculture and Environment has been communicating with the US government on the strategy for GM crops and also with the European Union. COAG has been complaining about the fact that there is a lack of public registries, there's a lack of transparency, there's a lack of ticketing as regards GM crops. Now, we bear in mind the position of many organisations who are against GM crops, and we have a very clear position whereby we reject the cultivation of GM crops. We reject it for agricultural reasons, as well as reasons of food security, environment security, respect for citizens and respect for consumers. We can see now that GM crops destroy the model of sustainable agriculture, the model of a family-based agriculture. GM crops do not respect the principle of precautions, and as farmers, it's very clear to us that our responsibility as farmers, our responsibility to citizens, our responsibility to consumers has to be backed up by this principle, the principle of precaution. Because as food producers, we have a responsibility. Talking about GM is talking about a model which is based on the present and on the future. Because if we have GM crops, we can't have any other type of cultivation. We can't have traditional crops and GM crops working together. And this has been shown in Spain by the huge amount of cases of contamination. In the zones where we cultivate crops, it's not possible to cultivate traditional crops because they're contaminated by GM crops. There are farmers, organic farmers, who have lost their crops. This leads to huge financial losses and hasn't been recompensated. If we have GM crops, we can't have any other type of cultivation. We can't have any other type of food. If we have GM crops, as farmers, we can't decide to have other types of production. Now, what response do we give to those who want to produce traditional crops? Beekeepers. Beekeepers can see the problem that their honey is being contaminated by GM. Bees travel many kilometers. And what guarantees do we have of coexistence? We have none. Coexistence is not possible. Contamination occurs year after year, and we can't guarantee safe distances. The loss of organic farmers in Spain is very high. According to a report by the University of Barcelona, we've lost 2/3 of organic farmers between 2004 and 2007 due to contamination by GM. And data from organic certification has shown that there has been a loss of areas of maize in the regions where there is also GM crops in Spain. So we can see that with GM we don't have a possibility for traditional crops. As farmers, we're very clear on a few things. It's more expensive to have GM crops. They don't produce more. The seeds are more expensive. And the sale of GM production is cheaper. So, what profit does GM crops offer to farmers? None at all. We're very clear about who benefits from GM crops. The multinationals, not the farmers. The surveys from the Eurobarometer show that European citizens are rejecting GM crops. And so what's the point of producing them if the European consumers are rejecting them? Does it really make sense? Is it an opportunity? We don't think so. We think it's quite the opposite. We believe that not producing GM crops offers many more opportunities for the market, and the future of agriculture has to be based on the use of traditional crops and not GM crops. If we produce GM crops, we'll just be doing the same as other areas in the world, and therefore our competitiveness won't be increased. We should produce what the consumers want and not what the consumers reject. Moving on to imports and imports of GMs for animal food. In Europe, we need for there to be a debate on the future of animal farming. This sector is experiencing a lot of difficulties, and with negotiations, for example, with Mercosur, we can see that animal production based on imports, based on increasingly expensive imports, mean that cereals destined for other production are becoming more expensive, for example, for biofuels, cereals which have an impact on climate change, on other factors. And particularly while we're going through a food crisis, Europe needs to have a future of animal farming which is based on production that we need. And we have to be clear on what we're doing. We have a lot of contradictions in the situation at the moment. The European consumer is demanding food security. The European consumer demands quality food and a production which is linked into taking care of the environment and also to the welfare of the animal, with increasing workplaces in the countryside, which is sustainable and which means that it creates services for society and can face up to the issues of climate change. So we need an agriculture which is based on the family, which is sustainable. And this is quite the opposite of what we can see with an industrial agriculture for GM crops. The debate proposed by DG Sanko about giving more capacity to states to ban GM crops is something that we would welcome, but we wouldn't welcome it if it's a trap to accelerate production.
Okay, thank you very much for this very emotional statement. Let's come to our next speakers. May you turn also to the panel here to us. Yeah, maybe you should switch the seats of the speakers, that also the last speakers have the chance to show their presentation from here. Okay. And we continue with Professor Dr. Evert Jacobsen. He represents the Wageningen University and Research Center.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm a professor in plant breeding, specialized in genetic variation, which is the basis for plant breeding. And I'm representing plant breeding in general. And I start my talk with history. When you look in history, then plant breeding exists already for many, many, many centuries. And domestication of crops was the first step in agriculture, but also in plant breeding. And 150 years ago, plant breeding was professionalized a little bit, so gradually. And so gradually we saw that there are two main aspects of plant breeding. That's selection, and that is genetic variation. And the selection methods have been said a few words about that. The new developments using mark-assisted breeding by our first speaker. Genetic variation is not an issue. And you see that the third development in plant breeding is GM. And unfortunately, GM started with genes from other organisms like viruses and bacteria. And therefore, we developed all this kind of rules. When the first step would have been genes from the plant itself, then I'm sure that we were not sitting here. When you look to the history of GM breeding, then you can subdivide it in two aspects. One is the use of transgenes and molecular and selection markers like antibiotic-resistant genes until 2000, and it's still going on. And after 2000, molecular biology made also possible that more and more plant genes are coming available. And me as a plant breeder, I'm really shocked that I cannot use these genes anymore because they are in a regulation which is unpractical for a normal plant breeder. And that's a very big issue for normal plant breeders. I'm not talking only about multinationals, I'm talking about the real plant breeders who are doing it already for many, many years. They are really shocked because of this development. And these genes from the plant itself are now wrongly situated in the same regulation as the transgenes, and I'm fighting to get them out. When you look back into history, what is the acceptance level? Why is he so low? Then you see, and we saw it already with the first speaker, that the connection of multinationals with the herbicides and other things, with seed business, that people don't like that. And that is the main objective where we are talking about. And all the other things are only to find reasonings to make it as complicated as possible. And we see now that because of this, making it much more complicated, that only big companies can use this new possibility, and that's a pity. Therefore, this new gene pool needs regulations, and I'm sure about that. And that means that what you see is that the low acceptance level is coming from this connection between multinationals and seed business and the new gene pool. And the new gene pool, that's really, we have to investigate that. And we are doing that already for several years. When you look into the market release in Europe, then you see that 32 varieties in 6 crops have been allowed, have been released, which are allowed to be imported, and 4 additional ones can also be cultivated. But you see also, and it was already mentioned earlier, that there is a ban of cultivation for certain crops in certain countries. And what we see is that this ban is legal when is a legal example of a differentiation between the EU members, but when there is no evidence, then it's illegal. And last week or this week, there was in the court of Luxembourg already a decision that one of these bans is illegal. What is the solution? Because we can talk about problems, but I'd like to talk about solutions. One of the big problems in Europe is lobbying. And I know it's very important, but we have to know also that it brings a lot of problems. I only mention it, not more. I also mentioned that we say that there is a coexistence regulation at national level, but not all countries are making these rules, and they are not punished, as far as I know. And we have also to know that science is going on. Mr. Mulder said already, science is going on, and that means that also the regulations have to be reconstructed every time again. And we have to listen to history. When we look to new scientific insights and on reconstructed logic, then one of the basic aspects is that classical plant breeding with the own gene pool is safe. Everybody agrees with that. And that means that that's the baseline from the 2001-18. And that mainly the 2018 has been developed because of the transgenes and because of the new technology. And now we see that we have experience with over 1 billion hectares of GMOs outside Europe mainly. And we have to listen also to science, what's going on. And one of the examples, it has already been mentioned earlier, is cisgenesis, that the genes from the plant itself are in the wrong regulation at this moment, in my view. And what is also interesting to hear this morning also is that many people believe that the genetics of living organisms is static. And that's not true at all. Because one of the main aspects in plant breeding is that it is not static. Genetic organisms are dynamic, and that you can see the best by maintenance breeding. When you have made a variety with a lot of work, then you have to maintain it. You have to reshape that variety every time again because it's running out of its description because of all kinds of spontaneous mutations and things like that. They do really exist. When the sun is shining, then all these mutations are coming up. And we can live with it already for many, many, many years. That's a very important statement I like to make. Another statement that I like to make is that tDNA, pieces of DNA from Agribacterium are already existing for many, many years in plants. And nobody is talking about that. It's all new. It's not new. For me, it's not new at all. It means that the dynamics of genetics has to be come more on table than it was until now. And that is an important statement. Another statement that I like to make is that we have to look into history. And then you see, for example, the Green Revolution, which started in the 40s in Mexico. That had a big impact. And there have been many, many discussions about Green Revolution. Then we are talking about short straw, wheat and rice and barley and all these grain crops. But it made India from an importing country into an exporting country for wheat, for example, for many years. But it came into Europe in the 1970s. And when you look to the concept of hybrid varieties in maize, the first hybrid variety appeared in the United States in 1926. And the first variety in Europe appeared in 1967 in a communistic country at that time, in Hungary. Our chairperson at this moment from the European Union. And we have to congratulate them with that occasion, that they were so quick. And another example is induced mutation breeding. The food scientists, they try now also to make mutation breeding a little bit dangerous. But we have many, many years of a positive experience with that. And we have to learn from history and look to history. And I'm sure that that history gives us more sureness than a molecular analysis, because that is only a very concentrated analysis on a very small aspect of plant life. And the other revolution I don't like to talk about because that's the gene revolution. That's the issue we are talking today. But my conclusion is that the European countries often are delayed in following new developments. So what the lessons I learned to prepare this for you is that history shows that core developments can and must not be stopped. You can shape them, but not stop them. So GM breeding will stay, also in Europe, I'm sure about that. And the recommendation I have is that individual state members must not be dependent on the slowest country in our European Union. Degrees of freedom are needed. And the proposal we are talking about today is, in my view, such a possibility. It means not the whole European Union has to miss the boat. And the ban on cultivation can better be made legal than illegal. That means then we can better look for good grounds which are accepted, non-scientific, than to misuse all kinds of aspects in regulations. Because that's not the way we have to talk to each other. We have to be honest to each other. And I believe that that's the most important issue I like to bring to you, that the European countries need degrees of freedom and give them, because they need it, because innovation is one of our spearheads. But in the way we are using it, we are practicing it now in GM, is a very, very bad way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's the second time that I heard today that the EU lawmakers do not follow or follow too late the latest developments. Thank you very much. Our last speaker is Dr. Ralf Michael Schmidt from BASF, and it seems to me that we have a very broad perspective of arguments, and I'm very grateful to the discussion and to the question we have after this. And if Dr. Schmidt has changed his seat, then he can start with his presentation. Yeah.
Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. A short introduction of myself. I'm working with BASF Plant Science, the company within BASF Group doing all plant biotech work worldwide. And I would like also to mention that we don't have an own seed business. We are a trait technology provider which helps our customers to optimize their plant varieties. The question today is justifying restrictions on the cultivation of GM crops. And what I would like to do in the following minutes with my short presentation, to give you an oversight first of the global context we are talking about. Then I would like to address socioeconomic aspects of GM plant cultivation, then safety and legal aspects, and I will conclude with some considerations from our side. So the next slide, please. If you look at challenges we have in global agriculture today, then we have four main challenges. That's on the one hand, the growing world population. 2050, 9 billion people on this planet, and they have to be nourished. We have rising standards of living, and that's very obvious if you go to Asia. People are eating more meat, and meat means you need crop raw materials to make the meat, and that is challenging. And especially if you compare the meat consumption we have today here, for instance in Europe, and compare it with China, there is really some gap in between. On the third one, we use agricultural raw products for industrial applications more and more. Takes a discussion about biofuels we have in Europe right now. Very interesting one. You can say you would like to have it or not, but that's the case, what we are facing. So our conclusion on that, very much in line with public institutions, that the crop demand will double within the next 20 to 30 years, and biotechnology can help to meet this demand. It's not the only tool, I'm sure, but it can help to meet the demand. So if you look now on the international situation we have with cultivation of GM crops worldwide, then we have to say last year 148 million hectares have been planted worldwide by 15.4 million farmers. By the way, 90% of them out of developing countries. So obviously there is some need for that. The added value created through all the time where GM crops have been cultivated is about 65 billion US dollars on the farm level. The yield increase is substantial if you compare that. So in this time span, it was equivalent to the yield of conventional crops on 75 million hectares. It contributed to a reduction of CO2 emissions and 50 years of commercial GM plant cultivation and no safety issues so far. 15 years of consumption. If you travel to the United States, you will have GM plants on every table you will see there. If we now come to the question, are there safety issues which might justify restrictions? I would like to indicate what EU-sponsored research has brought to the table for a long period, beginning in 1985 up to 2010. And obviously, out of this research, there wasn't any safety issue, and that means safety for humans, for animals, and the environment, and that also is very much in line what comes out by EFSA evaluations. If we as industry apply for a product approvals, the products going to the markets don't have any safety issue, and I think that's also very important if we look at our question today. Now, my third topic I would like to address is legal aspects, and there I'm referring to the Commission proposal, which Dorothee André this morning already addressed. So the question, how can we give more power to the member states to influence and ban restrict the cultivation of GM crop plants. There have been around this topic different legal evaluations. I will not go in every detail right now. You have a legal service opinion from the Council, from the European Parliament, by the Commission, and I'm not a lawyer, I cannot really judge what does that mean at the end of the day. What comes out for me is that there obviously is a problematic question whether it would be possible really to have restriction on GM crop planting in member states if they have been gone through the safety evaluation, if they have been approved on the European level. So, beginning of this year, the Commission came out with a list for with potential grounds to ban GMO cultivation. Dorothée André also referred to this this morning. And when looking back to what I said before, I have some difficulties to understand how we will really do this opting out on a right legal basis. Obviously, we have problems with the, and you were also referring to it, with the common market here in the European Union, free movement of goods. So we have to see what is coming out there. I learned also from newspapers that the member states have problems with that. The last is what I could read was a message of the Secretary of State, Mr. Spellman, United Kingdom. He made that public in the House of Commons and saying that obviously it's very difficult to justify banning of GM crops in Europe. And so the question from our side would be, or the point from our side would be, maybe we should use the rules we have already set. I think that would be one conclusion if looking at the different on the different arguments. But if on the other side, for political reasons, we would like to change something there, I think we have to consider the following issues here, which I have mentioned on my last slide. We think, as an industry, we need an EU-wide authorization of GM plants for cultivation, and that must be based on a scientific evaluation by EFSA. As an industry, but also farmers, I think, we need predictable and reliable conditions to work. You have to be aware of the fact that when developing GM plants, we are speaking about a time frame of about 10 to 12 years. Maybe that's also one reason that so far we only see herbicide and insect-resistant plants, but I can assure you the next time, in the near future, there will be completely different products. On the other hand, we think it's very important that freedom of choice has to be provided. Member states who want to offer to their farmers the freedom to choose modern agriculture technology should be free to do so, and reticence in one member state should not restrict advancement in another. The grounds for opting out, as I depicted, we think it's problematic, and the criteria suggested so far seem to contradict internal market and WTO law. And my last point, coexistence should not be EU mandatory. Currently, we have voluntary coexistence guidance, and it's an important tool to allow different farming systems to operate in parallel, and each member state must have the right to determine the appropriate nature of national coexistence measures. So with that, I would like to close. Thank you very much, and I'm open for any question you have.
Okay, thank you very much for all the presentations. It seems to me that it's useful that we combine the next 2 points on the agenda, reactions by Commission, Council and MEPs, and other questions and answers. I heard that Madam Rapporteur has to leave immediately to the next appointment. I think it's fair and good if I give her the floor first to react, and then you have to leave. So, Mrs. Lepage, Madame Lepage, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Krahmer. This has been a very interesting panel, very diverse. We've heard very different points of view. Well, what I would like to say is that obviously industry would like us to stay where we are, and we can understand why. I won't go into the debate because it's not the place to discuss whether GMOs are dangerous or not. We all have our own opinions on that. All I would like to say is that it seems a little contradictory to me to say at a certain point that there's no problem, no risk, everything's covered, and to refuse all responsibility. I think if GM producers had accepted responsibility and assurance, things would be very different. But the problem is that that's not the case, and so we have to make do. And so the problem for public authorities is to find the best way to defend the public interest, or the general interest, that of industry, consumers, farmers, and Europeans, that we must listen to. Because underlying this whole subject, as you said, sir, that there's no objective reason for all of this. There is a big reason. We've got a European population that is afraid of and does not want GMOs. And we have to listen to what our citizens are saying. I think that's the very basis of the democratic system. So I think that is an important point. And the second point is that I was very careful to listen to what Mr. Jacobson and Mr. Mulder had to say about scientific developments. I think that's very interesting and worth bearing in mind. But I think it does actually go beyond the current context of the text we're discussing. But I think it's a subject that we should pick up again at some point, because community legislation needs to properly protect Europeans' interests, health and the environment, but at the same time European legislation needs to encourage scientific and technological innovation. So I think we need to find the right kind of compromise, the right kind of balance between these 2 points, and technological development, any technological development that isn't covered by legislation is something we need to take on board, but I think it's very difficult at the moment to incorporate that into the text we're working on now. I think that those sorts of considerations go beyond what we can properly talk about in this context today. Now, as to what Mr. Garcia had to say, he said he was really speaking from his heart, and of course that's important. And he's speaking on behalf of many European farmers and citizens. So, Mr. Krahmer, thank you for organising the panel, and thank you for offering me the chance to speak and offering me to hear the points of view of everyone who's spoken today. So that's what I have to say. Basically, I think that this text is limited. Let's not expand it out. But one point that I would like to speak on is that somebody said earlier on that it was, I think it was you, sir, you were talking about, Mr. Petit talked about the integration principle. Well, I'm not sure that we can reason by analogy. Any different type of crop or any different type of product. The particular nature of GM crops, environmentally speaking, is the question of contamination and irreversibility. And I think that's a very particular subject that will not apply to cattle of a different species or different types of land use. So I think that when we know what the issues are and what is community business and community evaluation, and the way that this can be used locally, depending on what a country is and how they farm and what their environmental choices are, that's what we need to be working on as we await developments in legislation, which we know is going to be coming. So we're in a transitional period, if you like, but if things are going to get started next year on new legislation, we won't have that new legislation before 2016 or 2017, and we have to manage in the meantime. So that's what I have to say in response to what I've heard this morning. But I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave in 5 minutes' time, and I'll try and do so as quietly as possible.
Rapporteur, thank you very much for this reaction. The floor is now open for reaction and discussions. I would give the priority, if it is wished, to Council and Commission representatives. It is you wish, then I would start with the Mrs. André from the Commission, and somebody should count the hands that are raising up here. Yeah. So, Mrs. André, please.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I would like to respond to what's been said. First of all, although a number of participants that seem to be against the proposal might be in favour of it, the proposal is actually to allow there to be two speeds or two types of choice, people who want it and people who don't. That's basically all we're talking about. The proposal is not there for people to get authorisations through more quickly. That's not the case at all. Authorisations will be evaluated on the basis of the same strict criteria, and we will be applying the precautionary principle. That is essential. So what we're doing is giving a choice to those that don't want GMOs and to give a proper legal framework for that choice. It's not a debate for or against. We're not for or against. It's just to provide a basis and a framework for the different possibilities. On the different points that were raised, the need for thresholds, implementing the Council's 2008 conclusions, coexistence. Well, yes, we think these are important subjects. Coexistence comes under national competence. There are some parliamentary amendments as to how member states should apply coexistence measures. We do think it's very important for there to be coexistence measures. We've heard about new technologies, and we need to keep in step with developments and not be against technological developments. Yes, we in the Commission will be following closely this. We've heard about cisgenesis, and we've got a working group looking at that technology. And we will be always looking at how safe the technology is, what studies need to be carried out to judge the technology as being safe. So we are following this development closely, and we will be adapting legislation if necessary. With regard to the internal market, the single market, and the concerns I heard about that, the internal market, well, everyone would like everything to move everywhere, but currently that's not the case. There are safeguard clauses, so it's not ideal, and I think that we're not going to make things worse with this. We're hoping to make things better. Is the proposal in line with the WTO? Well, yesterday in Council, one of our experts from the Commission Legal Service was defending member states in WTO, and he talked about how he would defend a measure taken by a member state as long as it was well justified, how he would defend that measure. And he was fairly confident about his ability to do that. I'm not a lawyer myself, but I know that our legal service is telling us that this is going to work. We're very happy with the improvements that have been made by Parliament and in Council with the new compromise proposal from the Hungarian presidency. So we're hoping to be able to refine and improve the text, but basically we feel that this text really does add something. It's going to unblock the situation and make those who want to grow these crops be able to do so, and those who don't want to not do so. We've asked member states to provide us with reasons, and we think that the list that we created does broadly respond to the reasons that member states want to put forward, and we're quite open to including other reasons. And the Commission, as I said at the beginning, said that anything that the Commission felt was justifiable and proportional and defensible was good, as long as it does not affect the risk assessment, which needs to remain at community level, as I've already said. Thank you.
Wants the Council say something? Okay, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank again that I'm invited here. It's a great pleasure, and I think that Madame Lepage summarized the main problems, the main differences very clearly. We have heard different views in connection with the proposal as well, in connection with the current situation in the European Union as well. But I can tell you now, as presidency, we would like to bring the views together of the European Parliament and the Council, as I mentioned, as I already mentioned, and we would like to take into consideration all the member states' views. And I do not say that it is easy, but we will work on it, we will work very hard on it, and we would like to find solutions as well to alleviate concerns raised by the member states in connection with the legal base, with the WTO compatibility and the internal market as well. Thank you.
So, thank you very much. I have seen a lot of hands. I would like to start with a colleague of the Parliament. There we have here, I'm happy that you're here, a colleague from Luxembourg, Mr. Goppets. And please, you have the floor.
Merci, Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, Madame Lepage has just left, and I'm not greatly in agreement with her, because she said that the question was not whether GMOs are dangerous or not. But if we do ask that question, of the potential dangers of GMOs, we have to reply with current knowledge and say, well, no. After 20 years, people have been growing GMOs all over the place, and so far we've not seen any negative effect on human health or on animal health or on the environment. If we had, Greenpeace would have been shouting from the rooftops about the negative effects. Greenpeace only talks about long-term effects. My first question to the Greenpeace representative would be, what do you mean by the long-term? How many years are you talking about? 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years? What do you mean by the long-term? I mean, Greenpeace is right when we are told that only 10% of the world area of farming is cultivated. That's not much, and each year new farmers begin to grow GM crops, if the figures that I have are correct, in 29 countries, representing more than half of the world population. Because not only the 4 countries you mentioned, but other countries such as China, India and others, South Africa, Kenya, they're all growing all kinds of GMOs. So once again, without any negative effects. We're being told that European citizens are against GMOs. Well, yes. According to opinion polls in many different countries, a majority of people are against GMOs. But when you look at the at what Greenpeace are doing, it's surprising that to see that 30 or 40% of Europeans are not afraid of GMOs. And then another question to the Greenpeace representative, who has told us that there are only 6 major international corporations dominating 70% of the GM market, and 3 seed producers dominating 60% of the seed market. But current European campaigns and regulations, does that not comfort Greenpeace's monopoly on maize 810? Everyone knows that there are requests for much more valuable maize than that created by Monsanto that can't be put on the market because of insensate opposition from countries and within the Council. And should we not denounce the hypocrisy of the European Union? We are not capable of feeding our cows, pigs and poultry. We import 3/4 of our animal feed, and in particular from South and North America. And according to the Commission, 90% of these imports are GM. So who is feeding our herds here in Europe? Again, which is having no negative effects on the people eating the dairy products, the meat products created by these animals that are fed on GM food. The Greenpeace representative told us that GMOs are expensive. Yes, they are expensive to put on the market, which prevents small labs in universities to market their discoveries. And a lot of scientists are saying that a lot of the transgenic and cisgenic products are much better than what's being imported into the European Union today. And if GM products were so much more expensive, then how could you explain a ton of GM maize costing 150 euros less than a ton of conventional maize? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this statement. It's regrettable that Marco Contieri from Greenpeace couldn't hear your questions now, so it seems to me that you have to repeat it bilateral if you want to have an answer there. Sorry. Okay, then.
I have a list of 8.
Haven't seen you. Yeah, so I will give you the opportunity to answer that. Let me say a very small sentence as a parliamentarian. Yeah. Would it be an intelligent and good policy, political action to take based on polls? Yeah. On polls, on Umfragen. Is that a good political action? I don't know. If this would be a political principle, we could finish our parliamentary work. Yeah,
I agree with you.
Yeah, this is the only message I have there. You cannot ignore that, it's clear, yeah, but it should not be a principle. If that will be a principle, we should stop the negotiations of the entrance of the Turkey to participate in the European Union as a membership. So we have several hands on the. There was a lady on behind. Please introduce you. Maybe it would be helpful. And if you have a question, please address the question. So I would, if we have questions, I would collect 2 or 3 questions and then given the opportunity to answer. Thank you.
My name is Mute Schimpf. I'm working with Friends of Europe, and I have 3 different questions. When this proposal was launched by the Commission last July, we had strong doubts about the legal base of it and about which kind of legal solidity which would member states can use to ban the cultivation of GM crops. While we have been always in favor that member states or regions should have the right to ban the cultivation of GM crops, we have hardly criticized this proposal. So now the rapporteur, Corinne Lepage, suggested to change the legal base of this proposal, and my first question is to Rita Andoko. Does the Hungarian presidency support this change, of the legal base of the whole proposal in the Lisbon Treaty? My second question is to Mrs. Dorothée André. Commissioner Dalli has mentioned several months ago that he would support member states which would use the right to ban the GM crops if they would be sued by WTO. Would you also support legally the member states if they would be sued by the GM industry? And my last question is to Ralf Michael Schmidt from BASF. If the final proposal would more or less cover this list of grounds from the Commission, and the member states like Hungary, Austria, Luxembourg would ban the cultivation of GM crops by public moral or by this land use planning, could you imagine that you would sue the national government? And my second question to you is, you had some doubts about this coexistence rules, unified coexistence rules in Europe, but what we have learned from our panelists from Spain, that the organic farmers cannot cultivate anymore organic maize, and also conventional farmers struggles. And as a German, I was highly surprised that last year, the first year of the cultivation of this GM potato on flora, anyhow we had problems not on the fields, even in the laboratories, to segregate between the different GM potatoes that you develop. So I'm really wondering why you have some doubts about the need of clear coexistence rules if you have failed in the first year of a cultivation and have contaminated Swedish fields with illegal GM potatoes.
Okay, one more question, then I start an intro round. Please, the lady. Yeah.
Muchas gracias, buenos días.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Raquel Casamón, and I'm from the Young Farmers Association in Spain. Europe has the most strict regulations in the whole world, and particularly if we talk about GMOs. We cover all risks. So the type of production, both traditional and conventional, and GM, these are many. And if we want to face up to the challenges of the future, then we need to focus on how we're going to fulfill the demands of a growing population. So to do this in a sustainable way and protecting the environment, getting rid of all plagues that affect the cultivations, droughts, which affect particularly the south of Spain, we need to face up to our responsibilities. And then thirdly, we need to have an economic development, particularly in rural areas. So all of these debates are useful, they are necessary, but it comes to nothing if certain groups and certain organizations say that they are going to reject without taking into account the scientific studies which have been undertaken, and studies which show that biotechnology is a viable solution. As a Spanish Agricultural Association, we're neither for or against one or the other model. We don't want them to be discriminatory. We think that they should be complementary. What we want is the freedom of choice for producers, both small and large, and for consumers. As regards some of the information that Mr. Garcia gave, well, I have different information. It would be his word against mine. But I have official information from our ministry, and this has been approved by the Spanish government, and it says that in 12 years of GMO crops, we haven't seen one single problem between farmers because of the existence of coexistence of organic and GM crops. We haven't had any documented cases of problems in the maize crop cultivation. Coexistence is possible and is a reality in Spain. And in 20 years of GMO cultivation, there has not been a single negative impact. Mr. Garcia also said that there are 67,000 hectares of GM crops. I have data saying that there's 78,000 particularly in 3 areas of Spain. As regards the rejection of GM crops by the population, certain very important Spanish newspapers have shown that more than 90% of farmers who have been using biotechnology in their farms have done it because they see economic, social, and environmental benefits. And if Mr. Garcia says that 53% of the population is against GM crops and 26% or 27% in favor, and Mr. Petit also said that 10% of the population are prepared to buy GM crops, then I would say that the same situation for Spain. We have to make sure that this 27% have the possibility of choosing what they want. The EU and Spain need to gain in areas of competition, and they need to be sustainable. There are increasing imports from Brazil, China, India, the US, and a high percentage of GM production, for example, in Brazil, which is the highest, the biggest exporter to the EU. 5% is traditional and 95% is GM. Now, why can't we cultivate GM crops if we consume GM every day? Thank you.
So thank you very much for this very enthusiastic statement. It was not a question. But please be aware that we have still 15 minutes time, and this panel is not there to solve discussions. They have to be solved at a member states level. So I heard here some Spanish misunderstandings and controversials. This is not possible to solve that here. Please concentrate to the issues on the table related to the proposal we have here. The other things are not helpful. It seems to me we have to continue this debate on a later level. So we have some questions on the table, and I want to give the opportunity to panelists to answer that. Who wants to start? I think you was...
Yes, I received many questions. Well, let me try to address some of them at least. The figures, half of human population is represented by the countries that grow GM. The ISAAA report, which is the one you quote, and I also quoted, uses a lot of weird examples. They say that GM have been grown in 1 billion hectares by accumulating all the years of different cultivation throughout the world. They use trait hectares just to say that if a plant has 2 or 3 different traits, you calculate the same hectares 3 times. And on the representation of human consumption, they said that 80 million people in Germany are benefiting from GMOs, while there are 250 hectares of Amflora potato grown there. So I really don't want to use those kind of figures in the report. As regards the the market cost, well, the market cost when you import something that consumers want, GM-free, is clearly the market gives more value to that product. That's why it costs more. It's a market choice. It's not a choice of, it doesn't depend on the production. Plus, you don't take into account all the massive subsidies and the whole system that is not related to GM, but is related to how the CAP works, how the agreements with within WTO and the Blair House agreements have been established. As regards the, the fact that the costs of this technology are linked to the regulatory burdens of Europe. Well, these costs are faced by companies in the US, where there is no this regulatory burden on companies, and still in the US to produce a GM crop costs $150 million, as Monsanto states in its annual review. And to say something else, in places like the US where there is no this kind of opposition, neither by the regulators nor by the consumers, still the same 6 companies own the market. Well, not BASF, not here, but together with Monsanto in the US. So it's a myth to say that this technology is owned by 6 companies only because in Europe we have regulations which are stricter. Because this happens throughout the world where these regulations are not at all strict. Other issues on the the fact that you raised, if there is 10% of consumers that do want to eat GMOs, we should produce GMOs for them. Well, that's not what these polls say. The polls say that the 10 or more, 27% in Spain of population is not against GMOs, but it's not that they want to eat absolutely GM crops, because this is a completely different thing. Then the Commission proposal, just one small point there. I think it must be clarified that the Commission proposal is dealing with one of the issues at stake, but not with all the problems that have been raised by member states, by national competent authorities about the way in which the risk assessment is performed. This still remains another issue, which is aside from that. The implementation of the Council conclusions is not dealt with directly and completely by this proposal. That's why it just represents one single part of the issue. And then, well, let me just, one thing on climate and food security. I've been hearing about food security being mentioned. Food security is a very complex issue. Food security needs to be addressed in the countries where people are food insecure. We need to make sure that they need to produce more. They are given access to food. They are given access to market, rights of having lands and being using, access to natural resources. We need to tackle post-harvest losses and many, many, many more complex issues that we cannot deal with in this conference. But the issue of food security is so much more complex and relevant than the GM debate that I don't think we should raise it here. Thanks.
So the question have been, when the banning becomes into reality, would we sue? For instance, in Luxembourg. You know, I stressed during my presentation that obviously there are legal concerns regarding this proposal. If it becomes implemented, my conclusion would be it's completely in line with the legal basis we have here in Europe. If that is the case, we are always sticking to the rules. As a company, we are part of this society, we wouldn't sue, clear cut. But the legal basis has to be there. The second question you asked, that what's the clear coexistence rules, and you linked that with the Amadea-Amflora commingling case we had. I didn't say that we don't want to have coexistence rules, but I said, please keep it on the basis of the member states where really you know what coexistence means in this special environment. You know, because you also were referring to Amflora, I think it's a good example. Amflora, the cultivation of Amflora in the different member states was, and the coexistence rules about that, the identity preservation system around that, that was agreed with the authorities of these countries. And that's the reason why I'm saying keep it on that level. Please, no mandatory coexistence rules on the European level, because people in the member states know how to handle it.
Okay. Professor Jacobsen.
Yeah, what I heard until now is I didn't hear any danger today. No. I only hear all kind of things which are related to regulations which have been made to prevent. And I didn't hear any danger until now. And what I also hope is that the breeders' gene pool I was talking about, that will be available, that will stay available to the smaller breeding companies, because we need it for our food security worldwide.
Mr. Garcia, please be aware we are not able to hear to solve this Spanish controversy.
Sí, lo que pasa que el problema es...
Well, the Spanish problem could also be the EU problem. We aren't saying that coexistence isn't possible. The information that we've got is official information. Perhaps the colleague here hasn't got the updated information from this year. The data about contamination is data from the boards, the regulatory boards, and it's information which is recognized by the Spanish government. The reduction by 2/3 of organic maize producers in the areas where there's GM maize is also information which is included in this official data. And as an organization, we can see that if GM is produced, no other type of agriculture is possible. It breaks down the right as a farmer to produce non-GM crops. And this is very serious. This is a breakdown in the rights of farmers and also a breakdown in the rights of consumers to be able to choose. What we're debating here is that if we're producing GM crops, we can't produce crops which are non-GM crops.
Okay, thank you. I would allow several rounds of questions. It seems to me it's not possible to allow everything, but I try to do my best there. Maybe let's continue here with you. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is René Kusters. I'm from the Flanders Institute for Biotechnology here in Belgium. We house one of the best plant biology research groups in the world. I'm intrigued by the grounds that have been proposed as grounds for countries to restrict or ban certain cultivation of GMOs. And especially the ones concerning the environmental type of grounds. On the one hand, we are strengthening the risk assessment under the current legislation. And here we state, well, maybe there are some other grounds related to environmental things that may be used by countries to ban the cultivation. And an example was given in the type of, okay, maybe there can be a habitat somewhere that needs special protection, either from a cultural or a touristic point of view, we don't know. And that could be used by a country, for instance, to ban the cultivation of a certain GM maize. I wonder then, is a country allowed to do that indeed, and not allowed to ban the cultivation of a conventional type of maize for that certain similar situation, where in that conventional maize herbicides will be used, maybe also insecticides will be used, and we have no clue whatsoever on what the environmental impact of that type of cultivation is. So how can that be justified, taking into account general policy principles in the European Union regarding equality and proportionality?
So let's stay in this role. I think you had a question. Yeah.
Well, I have a question to the Greenpeace presenter. How on earth can you still maintain a line in your slide that non-target insects are harmed by GM crops when there is a plethora of studies, at least 4 major meta-studies summing up with sound statistics that GM maize is positive for the non-target insects by far. And how can you avoid to talk about such a piece of wonderful summing up 100 research results showing no harm for GM crops, and you still maintain your scare tactics? No wonder that you have 2 million signatures for your petition. But I can tell you also, Greek philosophers already stated, science has nothing to do with democracy and polls. Science is science and should be based on sound science, and you just on purpose ignore it.
Very good. Sometimes I have the impression we do not talk about data, we talk about the interpretation of data in the political sphere. So, third one.
I'm Fabio Niaspolo, and I am the representative of Futuragra, which is an Italian farmers association. and I want to be stick to the proposal, and I have some doubts because among the potential grounds for justify restriction to the cultivation of GMOs, I heard to avoid the GM presence in other products. But this should be, I mean, part of the Article 26 that is already in the Directive 18/2001. So, and then Ms. Dorothy André spoke about the need of proportionality in the national measure that member states may adopt to restrict the cultivation. But who will control this proportionality? I mean, I don't think there should be any central control from the European Union on those national measures.
So thank you. Please be aware we booked our interpreters up to 11:30. So it's possible, I don't know what they are doing, that we lose our interpreters, yeah, because the time is running out. Who has now questions? We are very urgent, and so I see two. And I would allow this two and then start a final round of questions and a short conclusion. Yeah? Thank you. Please start.
Je m'appelle Stella Velic et je...
My name is Stella Bellisi, and I'm a physicist and an IT expert, and I do have some knowledge about physical effects. And I'm a European citizen, and I can tell you that I will never eat a GM plant without knowing the effects in the short and long term on my health. And I don't know any scientific research from BASF, Monsanto, or anyone else holding a monopoly on the long-term research. The gentleman who was here asked what we mean by long-term. Well, long-term is not 5 years for all GM plants. It's different from one plant to another. But it's different number of years, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. I've done some research myself in this, and I can tell you quite clearly that the long-term effects are very different to the short-term effects on human health. And it's not just biologists and biogeneticists giving their opinion. Farmers, doctors, and environmentalists give their opinion on the short-term and the long-term effects of the influences of these plants. So that was an answer. That was a response. But my question is this. The Commission keeps saying that it's a country's own responsibility to decide whether or not to use GM plants or not. Well, if you say that, is there not a risk of a government saying we'll allow a GM plant because it's going to make more money, and they're not bothered about the health of their population? That's one thing. And secondly, with all the research that the big companies are doing, Monsanto and BASF, they have to say what the positive and the negative effects are of their research on these GM plants. There are many companies that don't talk about the negative effects because of the financial interests.
So thank you very much. Last intervention before I come back to the panelists.
My name is Lucia de Souza. I am a scientist. I'm here with Public Research and Regulation Initiative. I'm also a consumer, of course, as anyone else here. I'd like to say that all types of agriculture, they have advantages and disadvantages. So I see advantages in the organic methods, I see advantages in conventional methods, I see advantages in the GM crops, because it has brought socio-economic and environmental benefits. And I think because you have lots of research, like these booklets, that decades of research in the European Union, and because the cultivation of 10%, but this 10% means quite a lot because it's only 4 crops that we are talking basically. So if we had the next year's more crops available, that will be much more actually. Because you have so much data, so much experience, I actually feel more safe to eat a GM crop than the other methods that doesn't go through such a highly detailed and careful regulation that goes for details to see if it's risk for the health or the environment.
So thank you very much. I want to come back to the panelists. Maybe start now on the other side. Dr. Schmidt, if you want to start.
You mentioned these long-term effects and asked whether during our own evaluation we really publish, that's what I heard you saying, positive and negative effects of GM plants. Let me start with the long-term effects. As Klaus Ammann pointed out, and also I indicated during my short talk, since 1985, we are looking at any effect GM plants could potentially have. And that's more than 20 years now, and nothing, really nothing has been found. If there has been something popping up in the press, what I have seen so far, at the end of the day, it didn't hold and didn't withstand a peer review by a panel of renowned scientists. So to my best understanding, I would say I can't see so far long-term effects. That's what I can say. The second part of your question, positive and negative effects, and the big companies, BASF, Monsanto, and all the others, I can tell you, due to the fact that we have to earn money, we have to speak about positive and negative effects. So if we find something which is really negative, we would never develop such a product.
Thank you. No, you don't want? Professor Jacobs, please.
Yes, about the long-term effects, what I have seen until now are predicted long-term effects, and that is that herbicide resistance can be broken. And we know that that's found in literature, and that has been predicted. All the long-term effects are unknown for me at this moment. So they are not different from other effects which you can also find in classical plant breeding, until now, I always say. And the lady about the more safe of GM crops have been focused on a few genes which have been brought in, and that's safe. But I'm more convinced about the years, many years of safe consumption I have from classical plant breeding. And this is adding also for the new traits which have been brought in additional safe feeling. But the safe feeling we have already there. And I like to stress that because of Europe like to be an innovator, please give the different state members a chance for that. So that we change somehow the rules in a way that individual countries can go on, and other countries that they can stay where they are.
Well, on Klaus Ammann comments, again, you can insult me as you usually do, but the question is, what I say is based on scientific studies, peer-reviewed. Yes, it is. And you can insult those scientists and their scientific reviews for publishing those studies. As regard the polls, it's one slide out of 27, and I also skipped through it. I don't think we need to base on polls, but I think it is quite relevant to know that the majority of citizens in Europe increasingly don't want this kind of technology in their plates. That's it. The G Research booklet, that booklet is not about the safety of GM crops. The research there are research about development of GM crops, about the kind of measures. There are research about the development of GM mosquitoes. I don't remember exactly all of them, but that is, if it's just brought forward as if it was 10 years of research about safety of GM crops, I know it's part of those are inferred from other studies. It's not. It's a lie to say that it's a booklet just about safety. It's not true. Then, as regard the short-term and long-term studies, the 90 days studies in with laboratory rats is the maximum amount of studies that are used before the authorization of GM crops. For pesticides, we know that the time is much longer, it's about up to 2 years. What we are saying is that this is not enough to show, even in laboratory, what kind of long-term effects there could be from this kind of plants. As regards the herbicide resistance, I didn't get exactly your point, but I think it is an issue. It's increasingly an issue. That's why companies in the US are telling their consumers to start using more and different herbicides, and that's why there are new crops with tolerance genes to different kind of herbicides to respond to these problems. And as regards to the, well, we've seen Americans eating GMOs since 10 years. Again, there are no studies. In a Natural Biotechnology article from March 2010, it's quoted that the research that was done in order to find out how many studies have been done looking at the impacts for consumers, it couldn't find studies because we don't run these kind of studies. And that's a problem. We just rely on the fact that, well, we know that in the US, sicknesses related to consumption are massive, but we don't look at why and where these sicknesses come from.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Quelques points. Premièrement.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few points on what Madame Lepage said about coexistence and irreversibility. Let me recall that a large number of the crops that we grow in Europe are not original from Europe, and we keep bringing in new varieties. So it's not just a question of GMO or non-GMO. New varieties that are brought in will pose the same problems of coexistence and irreversibility. So I don't think we should focus only on GMOs. Now, on the possible impact of herbicides, Mr. from Greenpeace said that there is an evaluation system for herbicides as well, which is quite separate. So that again, another point that isn't mentioned often enough is GMOs and health security. Let's take an example today. Brazil is asking to a reduction of the mycotoxin level in the Codex Alimentarius. They're asking for a reduction in this. It's because they're using GMOs that allows them to be more to perform better against the insects that develop these mycotoxins out in the fields. So GMOs do make it possible to meet health and food safety targets. The system of assurance and responsibility, that's never been rejected by European farmers in Copa-Cogeca. And finally, on the fact that there are large companies working in biotechnology, well, I would like to say that unfortunately it was public research that was doing this research and back in the 90s, but then a different choice was made, and then the private sector took on mastering the technology. So I think we need to be aware of that. You can't say that the private sector owned the whole thing, but that was the national policy that actually cut research funding. And that made it possible for the corporations to be able to completely take on developing the technology. And I think you need to take that into account when you're looking towards the future. When new technology comes in, don't repeat the same mistake. Let me recall that 90% of European farm production is sold inside Europe. So if there is no market, if there were no market for GM products, European farmers wouldn't produce it. So if there's not a real demand, why would European farmers produce it? Certainly not to export, that's definite. So if it was just a question of freedom of choice and the amount of rejection that you've been talking about, there's no need for national bans because consumers themselves will create the balance in the marketplace. Thank you.
Sí, decir que desde COAG no nos oponemos.
From the point of view of COAG, we're not against research into GMOs, but it has to be in a public way. At the moment, GMOs are a business instrument of a few multinationals, and it's working in a monopoly type of way. Today, GMOs do not give anything to the farmers. They don't resolve any problems, but they do cause us problems. We can't produce anything that isn't GM. We don't have any possibilities for other types of agriculture, and this is very serious because it violates the possibility of choosing, having a free choice. At the moment, in Spain, there is no guarantee of non-GM maize. Consumers, if they want to have non-GM maize, have to go to France or to other European countries, because in Spain, we cannot guarantee that maize is not contaminated. This is a very serious problem and could expand through the EU. Possibilities for choosing, well, with GM, there is no possibility of choosing to have non-GM crops.
Short message to the Commission.
Now, I was intrigued by what Mrs. André said, and I'd just like to have her saying that again, a confirmation. The Commission is making proposals to adapt the new technologies in the existing legislation. Is that what I understood from you, that you have taken note of the new techniques, cisgenesis and so that are available, and that within the foreseeable future we can expect proposals from the Commission so that this legislation is adopted? Now, then as far as I am concerned, that's a very good morning.
Okay, thank you very much. It is not easy to find a conclusion here. I think this debate shows that we are middle in an extremely and very controversial debate. Let me try to say one thing as an elected parliamentarian. It seems to me that we have in Europe and on an EU level, with very good reasons, a precautionary principle. If we take political decisions, keep in mind the precautionary principle. I'm here since 6 years, not so long as you, Jan, but sometimes it seems to me that we try to mislead this precautionary principle to a zero-risk principle. If we try to eliminate risks from wherever you come, if you try to eliminate risks, you create an extremely innovation-unfriendly environment. That should be avoided, especially if you take into account the situation around Europe there. The world is not static, the nature is not static, and we should not try to conserve the world or the nature. So the job that the parliamentarians and the Council has to do now is, I think one thing that is, one common ground is here in the room, is to give a guarantee for the freedom of choice for farmers and consumers. Therefore, we need a reliable and clear legal base, and it seems to me that it's not just easy. And we need further discussions, and a decision on a European level can only be taken if we are able to have a compromise. So that's why it's important that no one, as I'm convinced, I say very clear, no one has to stick or should stick to the dogmatic position. If everybody sticks to a dogmatic position, there will not be a decision. So thank you very much for that. It was very useful, very helpful. Thank you for all the panelists, and thank you for all the for the participation. It seems to me it is useful and necessary to continue this debate. Thank you very much.